Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and I have another project for you. This is a pillow cover, and this is the one that I made. The block is called Best of All, and it's a little bit more complicated than the blocks I have been doing. So to make this pillow, I'm going to do this in two different videos because it is a little bit longer. So instead of having one really long video, there'll be two short videos. So for the first video, I'll demonstrate how to make the block, and then in the second video, I'll show how to put on the borders, and I'll show the quilting that I did on the front, and then I'll show you how to make the envelope back. So there'll be two videos for this project. So it's not complicated, but to do a tutorial, it takes more time. So I just wanted to break that up so they won't be quite as long. So this is all made with a layer cake. So I bought one layer cake and I'm making 4 different projects out of it. So that way, if you have a layer cake that you want to use up, here's a couple of projects that you can use with it. So I hope you'll stay with me, and I'll show you how to make the Best of All block. Okay, here's all the fabrics for the Best of All pillow, and this is all the fabrics for the block as well as the borders. We've got some larger pieces here. These are going to be our borders, and then we have cornerstones here for the borders also. So I'm going to explain these a little bit differently than I normally do because this block has a lot of pieces in it, and it's going to go together differently than what I have been showing you in the last several months. This is the center square. This is piece A, and it's a 4.5 inch square, and I did fussy cut this one out so that I had this flower here in the center. Now B, you're going to cut 4 3-inch squares, and then you're going to cut them on the diagonal once to give you triangles. C is 4 2-inch squares, and D is 4 3-inch squares. Now I decided to, the D and the F pieces are going to go together to make half square triangles. So I decided to use triangle paper. So D and F I cut large enough to use my paper with. So if you decide to use triangle paper, foundation paper of some sort, follow the directions with the paper so that you know how big to cut your squares. Basically, I cut out 4 squares from my roll, and then I cut my fabric 1/4 inch bigger on all 4 sides. So that's how I did that. Now E is for flying geese units. This is 4 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. F is here. That's the white here. It's the background that goes with the D fabric for our half square triangles. G is 8 2.5 inch squares, and you'll want to draw diagonal lines on the wrong side. These are going to make the flying geese units, so those are going to go together. Okay, H is 8 2.5 inch squares. You don't have to draw anything on those. I is 2 3.5 inch squares, and you cut those on both diagonals to make triangles. And then J is the border around the block, and so you'll need 4 pieces that are 2.5 by 12.5 inch long. So those are long rectangles. K is the cornerstone. You need 4 of those that are 2.5 inches. L, now I cut these are going to be the outer border, and I know they're shorter, but you're going to use 2 pieces for each side. So you have 8 that are 2.5 by 8.5 inches. And I'm working with 10-inch squares here. I've got a layer cake that I'm working with. So J is my background fabric. It's yardage, so I could get 1 long piece out of that. But you know, when you're working with 10-inch squares, the largest piece you can get is only 10 inches long. So I need something longer than that. So I'm going to have 2 pieces each, and I've got different fabrics here. I've got 2 different fabrics, and I'm going to use those, and I'll show you how I place those when we get to the block. And then M is the corner squares for that outer border. So right now we don't have to worry about these pieces, so I'm going to set them aside and get them out of my way, and we're going to work with these right now. So it doesn't look quite as intimidating when you don't have as many pieces out. So first thing, we're going to make half square triangles. So I'm going to use my triangle paper. You're going to use your D and your F squares if you decide not to use triangle paper or foundation paper. I'm going to put my pieces right sides together. Okay, so here I've cut my fabric so it's wider than the paper, and I'm going to go ahead and put some pins in this to hold it together while I'm sewing. And with this paper, you sew on the dotted lines and you cut on the solid lines. So just follow the directions for the paper that you're using. And if you are cutting squares and drawing lines on the wrong side, then you'll want to sew a 1/4 inch away from both sides of the drawn line. And the directions are written for that. They're not written for the triangle paper, because I don't think you should have to go out and buy something like foundation paper to make this block. So if they're written for the traditional 2 at a time half square triangle method. So we're going to make half square triangles. So I'm going to adjust the camera and get started sewing. Okay, so I'm getting ready here to sew the half square triangles using the foundation paper. I'm going to go ahead and change my presser foot, because I have found with this 1/4 inch foot that I have, it has this guide on the side that drags along your fabric. Well, it drags along the paper and it doesn't glide so well. So I'm going to take that off, and I'm going to put on the foot that came with the machine. So it's a traditional foot here. And this also has an open toe so that I can see better too. So that's a help. I'm going to sew on the dotted lines, and I'm going to lower my stitch length a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to lower my stitch length again back to normal, and I'm going to go over to the cutting mat, and then I'm going to cut on all of the solid lines, and then I'll tear my paper away, and I have my half square triangles. Okay, I have all of the half square triangles done. So I've got all of them here, and now I need to sew an H square to them. So we have all the squares, oops, this way. So we're going to have the triangles, the colored part of the half square triangles are going to face each other, and then the other two corners are going to have the H squares in them. So I'm going to sew all of those together. So I'll have 2 rows, and then I'll sew all those rows together, and then we'll have four patch blocks. And I've gone back to my 1/4 inch foot. Okay, so I have them all sewn into pairs, and now I'm just going to sew them together so that we'll have our 4 patch. So I'm going to nest those seams together. And you can pin or not, whatever works best for you. I think I'm going to go ahead and pin all of these and then sew them all at once, and I think that will speed things up a little bit. Okay, I have a diagonal line drawn on the wrong side of all of these G squares. So I'm going to start on the right side of the rectangle. I'm going to sew on that drawn line right there. So it's going from the center top to the bottom right. Okay, let's clip them apart. Okay, then I want to cut off the outer corner, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so what we have is this. So I need to press all of these back, and then I'll sew the square onto the opposite side. So here are the flying geese units. So I have 4 of those. And next thing we need to do is we need to make some cat's cradle units. So those are a little bit more complicated, but really not bad. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take the C squares and the I rectangles, and we're going to sew an I rectangle to adjacent sides of the squares. So I'm going to start first by sewing them all to the same side, and then I will flip them around and do it the other way. So we're going to sew one of the straight ends, or where you have the short ends, the 45-degree angles, those are going to sew here, going right here, and then we'll take another square, and then that one will go here, so we will have a triangle. So I'm going to sew those one by one. So if you keep in mind that you need to form a triangle, a larger triangle with this, I think you'll be able to get that all straight. And there are diagrams in the pattern, so that will help you also. Okay, and I'm going to clip these apart, and I'm going to press that background triangle out and then sew the other one on. Okay, so keeping in mind that we need to make triangles with these, I want to sew this one on this side. So that will fold out like that. So I'm going to turn this so that the green square is up. That way I don't have to mess with this seam down here. I don't have to worry about it flipping on me. But I do have this little point sticking out, so I'm going to clip that off. Okay, so here's one of the units. I have a little dog ear down here, so I'm going to clip that off. And I'll clip that off with all of the units. And then we should be good to go to move on to the next step. Okay, so now I need to add the B triangles to these units. So this is going to be sewing them on to each side, and I'm going to adjust the camera and do this laying flat so that you can see that. So let me do that. Okay, so here's the unit I just sewed, and now I need, let's see, let me do it this way. And now I'm going to sew the long edge of the triangle. And get this separated like that. So that's what we need to form, is this right here. Okay, so I'm going to do the same with each one. I'm going to sew one side first and then sew the other. So we'll have 4 of those units. So I'm just going to match my points up here, the points that are there. And I'm going to do one here so that you can see the whole process. Okay, so that's going to be pressed out. So I'll do that. So we have that much. And then I will sew on the other one. I'm going to have to flip it around and work from the back side. And I'm going to match up the points here. Clip off that little dog ear. Okay, now let me press this one and I'll show you what we have. Okay, so here is that unit. I just need to trim off dog ears and then make the other units, and I'll eventually have to trim off the dog ears down there too. So I'm going to go ahead and finish sewing these other units, and then we'll move on to the next step. I have all of the cat's cradle units done, and they need to measure 2.5 by 4.5, and they're going to be a little bit large. As you can see, this one, there's quite a bit of space between the point and the edge, and they're all like that. So I have a 4.5 inch ruler here, square ruler, and I am going to line this up so that the point here goes right at the 1/4 inch mark. And I also have a diagonal line. I'm going to run that right up against the seam right here. And I can see from this ruler being 4.5 inches that I've got quite a bit of extra space here. So all of the measurements that I gave you for the pieces are a little bit over large for this unit, which is a good way to do this unit, because this unit can be a little bit tricky. And I'm okay this way, but I need to cut these sides here. So once again, I'm going to use my diagonal to help, and I don't want to cut off the point here. So I'm going to just line all of this up. And I know this is a straight edge, so I'm following this. Got a little extra up here, just a tiny bit. Now if you don't have a 4.5 inch ruler, you can just use any square ruler that you have. Okay, so now it measures 2.5 by 4.5. Okay, so 1, 2.5, there we go. And I'm going to do it with the others. So what I want when I get those sewn together with the flying geese units, I want this point to meet. I don't want a lot of space in there. And I want these 2 points to meet, and I still won't need to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance there. So this is a little bit of a tricky unit, but just take your time, do your measuring and trim if you need to, and I think you'll be able to get it done without too much difficulty. And now I'm going to take those units and the flying geese, and I'm going to sew them together. And what I'm going to do is to sew the white of the cat's cradle units to the flying geese. So they're going to go like this. So just put those right sides together. You've got seams here that you're going to want to match if you can. You know, do the best that you can on that. Both seams are going the same direction. So if you want to, you can always press one the other way. What I usually do is I will just fold one seam over so that those will nest, and then I'll pin it. Let that seam go back where it was, and that usually helps. So now we're ready to lay the block out and then sew it together in rows, and then we'll sew the rows together. So what we have are 3 different units. So we're going to take our A block, and that's going to go in the center right here. And then these blocks are going to go around it, and we're going to put the darker flying geese unit or the cat's cradle unit next to it. So these are going to be our start points, these red pieces here. And I think that looks good. And then these 4 patches are our corners, and we're going to put those like this. So we're going to have the white square going towards the center. So I think we've got it all. This is called the best of all block. So it's very pretty. You got points to match all the way around here. You don't have to match anything here, but you got to watch these points so that you don't blunt them off. So take your time with doing that. Okay, so I'm going to sew these together. I'm going to sew the first 2 pieces of each row together, and then I'll add the 3rd, and then I'll press and we'll sew the rows together, and the block will be complete, and then we'll need to work on the borders. Okay, so I have my seams nesting, so they're going to be fine, but I'm going to put a pin through the point of this triangle so that it comes out there, and then go through here and put it through the point of this one, and that'll help keep things lined up. And I'm making sure my pin is perpendicular and not turned to one side or the other. And I'll take it out and then put it back in. And this is all to keep from distorting and shifting the fabric. And then we'll go ahead and sew. So here's the completed block. So I think it's a pretty block. I think it turned out pretty well. Okay, so that is the tutorial on how to make the best of all block that I put into this pillow cover here. And this does make a 20-inch pillow. So you can buy yourself a 20-inch pillow form, or you can make your own pillow, stuff it with polyfill, and you know, do it however you want. So I hope you will watch the second video that will be out next week, and it'll show you how I did the quilting and how to make the pillow back. So I hope you will join me next week. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links, and to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.